This is an English travelling trunk from the mid-19th century. It's made of oilcloth on softwood, probably pine or maybe deal. Quite nicely made, not as good quality when it was first made as a leather portmanteau or trunk, but still a nice watertight, good looking and very usable trunk. We've got brass stud work here with gaps in between the studs, which is quite a nice little indicator that it's an English trunk rather than say a Chinese export one. You've got strap work here just to give it some extra strength, and also on the top of the lid here we've got an overhanging leather section all the way around the top there, and that when it's closed just helps seal it, and any water that might be coming down if it's on the back of a carriage will just flow down off that and off the trunk, so that gives it a nice little bit of protection. But what's really interesting about this trunk is that it's got a super label to the inside for W Insall. Now Insalls are probably one of the best luggage makers of the West Country in England. Let's have a little bit of a closer look at that label and tell you a bit about the company of Insall. So there we can see it really is quite a decorative label, and there's an awful lot going on there and an awful lot of information. It says W Insall at the top there. Now we know from looking through the directories and other labels of the company's work that we've seen that they advertise that they were established in 1829, and we've also seen the initial G Insall on some of their earlier labels. Now G Insall was George Insall. He's likely to have been William's father and the man who set up the business. Certainly by 1837 we see him recorded in the trade directories, and their address was 19 St Augustine's Parade in Bristol. In 1856 business is still recorded in the local directories as G Insall, but by 1865 William had taken over the running of the building, of the business rather. So we know somewhere between 56 and 65 William would have taken over. It's also interesting to note actually in the 1865 directory that it states that Insall, aside from making luggage, were also makers of travelling equipage. So presumably campaign furniture. A lot of luggage makers, trunk makers, expanded their business into making campaign furniture, as we well know. Makers like Allen and Hill and Millard and Day and Sons and John Pound, of course, among others. But this label also tells us quite a lot about the sort of things that they did sell. Manufacturers of improved solid leather portmanteaus, and we can see some portmanteaus here and here. Improved coat bags, hat cases, and enamelled leather bags. So presumably that was a leather bag which had a superior paint on it, just to give it perhaps a smarter finish or perhaps add to its waterproofing. And here we've got the address, 19 St Augustine's Parade. Now they also expanded next door to number 20 sometime in the second half of the 19th century, and it really would have given them very impressive premises. 4 floors. The building still stands. It's got classical columns to the sides of in the middle, and really it would have looked quite an impressive building. I believe Boots for Chemists have it now, and so maybe worth a visit down in Bristol if ever you're there. They also had their name written in great big bold letters on the building, so you knew exactly whose business it was. Now down here as well, it also says that they were wholesalers for exportation. Now that's quite interesting because we've had two leather boot trunks in the past which were made by Insall, but they also had the names of Thompson of Leicester and John Cave and Sons of Rushton stamped on them. So that ties in nicely. Insall made the trunks, Cave and Thompson were probably boot makers, and they sold the trunks to their customers through their establishments in the Midlands. Let's have another quick look at the trunk. So we've got quite a good brass lock fitted here. Iron carrying handles, and if we turn it onto its end we can have a look underneath. Now it's got sledge feet or runners underneath, and these are quite important. We can also see the wood which is underneath the oilcloth, which indeed is a pine. So these runners are quite important because it would keep the trunk off a wet surface. If you put it on the ground when it had been raining, or it was on the top of a carriage and rain was sloshing around, you don't want the bottom of your trunk getting wet, the water damaging the wood, ruining the trunk, or perhaps even seeping in to the contents to damage that. Now Insall carried on into the early 1900s in their business, and we know in 1914 that they're still listed. We haven't been able to find any record of them after that, so I mean I would guess it's likely that they went out of business between the two world wars. Certainly life was changing then. You could travel much quicker, much faster, much further. You didn't need to take as many bags and trunks with you because you could get everywhere much quicker. But they're very good West Country makers, and from what looks like just quite a plain black oilcloth trunk, it's elevated by having that label and knowing that it was made by such a good maker. And of course for modern use today it would be very useful for say putting your winter jumpers in during the summer for storage. You might be able to use it as a coffee table as well perhaps, or something like that. Still got a practical use.